Welcome to Season 2 of the Pivot Point podcast. This season, we are featuring candid conversations. We're interviewing industry experts and leaders about candid conversations they've had that involve gender in some way. They're going to fill us in on what happened, what prevented them from addressing it, the risks they took in that conversation, why they chose to say something and how they handled it, and what happened next. Stay tuned for Pivotal Stories, a Positive Change. In the studio, we have with us Denise Herd, who is an entrepreneur, visionary, and mentor. Utilizing decades of experience in marketing, public relations, and strategic communication, Herd launched Herd Strategies, a full-service public relations firm, in 2011. Since entering the market, Herd Strategies has developed a reputation for being the go-to firm for companies or individuals looking for innovative marketing, public relations, creative design, or community outreach strategies that will separate them from the competition and yield a strong ROI. Outside of business, Herd is highly sought after public speaker and workshop facilitator. She is passionate about developing business, is a certified facilitator of the Kauffman Foundation Fast Track New Venture Program, and guides startup entrepreneurs through all sorts of phases of business ownership. She serves as the board of directors of the Shalom Healthcare Center and Summit, a newly formed feminist theater here in Indianapolis. And she also serves as the co-chair of the National Association of Women Business Owners Government Affairs Committee, vice chair of the Indianapolis Chamber Women's Business Advisory Council, and is a graduate of the Stanley Lacey Executive Leadership Series and an adjunct professor at IUPUI. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including Public Relations Society of America, also the Hoosier Capital Pinnacle Award, the Monumental Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and the International Association of Business Communicators Gold Quill Award and Diversity Advocates Award. So she holds a Bachelor of Arts from Clark Atlanta University and an MBA from Indiana Wesleyan. Well, welcome, Denise.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? It's amazing.
Very accomplished. You're doing everything. Well, what I love about your bio, there's all these amazing ways you're contributing to helping entrepreneurs, but also helping women. And I know something
Absolutely.
You're deeply passionate about helping women find their voice. And you're certainly leveraging your voice in a variety of ways. You're writing a book right now, which we're going to get to in the episode. But Denise, as we do with all our guests, kick us off with a candid conversation. You know, we talk about gender equality in the workplace. How has that shown up for you?
You know, it's been really interesting. Throughout my entire career, all of my bosses that I ever had when I worked in corporate America were always women. So I really learned a lot of my lessons about, you know, maneuvering or finding my sea legs or finding my way from women. But when I became a business owner, then some of my mentors became men, which was really, really interesting because men have a very different thought process. But I think my first exposure to working with men or looking at men as possible mentors came when I worked for an advertising agency many years ago. There were 3 partners, and I reported to the female partner. However, my ally or my guidance that really helped me grow within the company came from a male partner. And that was my first foray into turning to men for support as I worked through my career.
That's awesome. How did that establish? How did you establish that relationship with him?
You know, it was really interesting. There was something about his energy that I just really, really connected with. And so it was just very, very organic, very natural. And so I remember being at a company outing and just approaching him and asking him if I could go to lunch with him and just talk about, you know, my job at the agency, my vision, my plans, you know, just kind of what was on my heart. Because ironically, there was another male that worked for the agency that wanted to be a mentor to me, but the energy just felt off to me. So this one particular partner, we developed a bond, developed a relationship, and he and I would talk quite a bit. And then we had a situation where I was working with a client, and the client was talking to me in a way that was highly inappropriate. You know, it was harassment basically, and it was very uncomfortable, very unsettling. And it was so unnerving for me because he was talking to me in ways that were inappropriate, and it was in front of my staff.
Wow.
And so I never, as a supervisor, as a boss, you never want to put those that look to you or that report to you in a situation that's uncomfortable for them.
Sure.
It's almost like you as the boss will take the hit, but when it starts impacting those that report to you, then you kind of go into like warrior mode, if you will. So, and so I wanted to protect them, and I was trying to protect them, but the more I said, the more aggressive and inappropriate he became. So after the meeting ended, my staff was clearly upset. I mean, they were clearly rattled by the situation. So I took the comments to my boss, who I reported to, who was a woman, who basically told me to ignore it, that he was just kidding, I was overreacting, that I should just shake it off. But it just really bothered me, because how can we as women know that another woman is being harassed and not stand up for her?
Absolutely.
That just absolutely bothered me to my core, because how can I, as a woman who had women reporting to me, go back and look at them and tell them, oh, just let it go? Then my value goes down, and then they wonder, well, who am I, and will I advocate for them?
Right.
So I decided that I would take this information, take the situation to the male partner that I had a good working relationship with. And oh my goodness, he was more upset than I was, in fact, by what had happened. And he vowed that he would get it taken care of, and he would get it shut down, and he would deal with the female partner that didn't stand up and defend me. And that was a game changer for me. That was a real game changer for me, because here was a man that, that saw me not just as an employee or as a supervisor, as, a leader in the organization, but as a woman. And that as a woman, I was being treated in such a way that was so inappropriate. And he just was not going to have it for me as a company, for me as an employee within his company,
sure,
and for me as a leader in the organization, and for all the other women that work within the organization. And he even made, had meetings with all of us. They instituted a policy, to help us as women or as employees that were being harassed, how we could report it. And he really was an advocate for us and for me personally throughout my entire tenure at the agency.
That's such a great story of stepping into that candid conversation and being willing to hold people accountable, to get input, make the tough calls. And in a client, when you're in a client-facing business, I think sometimes it's easy to look the other way. Well, it's the client, clients are clients.
Exactly.
It's not okay.
Exactly. And it wasn't. No, it's not, because, people being harassed, people being verbally, sexually harassed, none of that is appropriate in the workplace. And, and of course, having that conversation with both of those partners was very uncomfortable, because I had to go into detail about what he was saying to me. So now, because you can't just say, oh, he said something, you have to say what was said. And, saying that to anyone is very uncomfortable, let alone being a male saying what another man has said to you was so unsettling for me. But he just let me say it. He never judged. He never reacted. He never questioned. He never doubted. He just received the information and did what was right with the information.
And that's
so I'm so grateful for that.
Absolutely. I hear that often from our allies. Are really good listeners. They don't judge us. They don't question our intentions.
Right.
Did you put yourself in that situation? Where were you? All of that presumes kind of it's the victim's fault. And so just without that judgmental filter, listening, soaking the information, and then taking action with it. What a great candid conversation story, Denise. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
So we've gotten to know each other over the years with your work with the Women in Business, Indie Chamber, amazing retreat that we do here in town. It's awesome how you keep it specifically kind of an intimate group, cap attendance at that 300 mark. And really, it's a nice 2-day kind of getaway in the winter months, which can be trying here.
Yes.
But women practicing real self-care. I mean, there's elements of career and professional. I love the blend of it. It's a great event. If you haven't attended and you're here, I'd love to hear from you, because this year you had a Men as Allies panel. This is something Continuing to build momentum for getting men involved in the conversation with
Absolutely.
a few male attendees from time to time.
Hmm.
How is that
Absolutely.
going? Like, how did you get there? For organizations that aren't there yet, that it's still women's only, or they're thinking about bringing in allies, help us understand your journey and what words of wisdom you'd offer in learning how to do this.
Well, so here's the thing. Inclusivity is key in everything that we do. We're all marching to the drumbeat of inclusiveness. We as women say we want to be included. We want to be included. We want to be included. So then how can we, and this is just my opinion, I just don't know how we can have a conversation about inclusivity and not include the people that we're accusing or, saying like, hey, you're not including us. Then we're just talking to each other. So it's important that we have men at the table so that they can hear what we're saying, but not only that, so we can hear what they're thinking or what their perceptions are. We have to include everyone in the conversation in order to march down the path of inclusivity. Because, you're a woman, I'm a woman. If we're just talking to each other about people aren't including us, but we don't include the people who have left us out, then we're just having a conversation. We can't affect change. So that was the one thing that stood out to me as we were having the conversations about bringing men to the table. I thought, absolutely, because we want to hear how they feel, because men do have a perspective. There is a reason why they think the way that they do. There is a reason why they make the assumptions that they make. And they won't know if their assumptions are accurate or if they're flawed if we don't talk to one another. So I want men at the table. I'm so excited when, I was really excited last year when we had the panel and we had an open and candid conversation about Me Too. Me Too impacts all of us. And we have to talk about it and we have to share in order to, keep everyone's attention focused on what is and is not inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Yep. So that was very, very important to me. And then at our last breakfast, we had men at the breakfast, and I was so grateful to see the men there because we all need to be talking to one another. We have to be. We just have to in order to move our businesses forward and in order to move our community forward. It's just imperative.
Yeah. It's funny. I think it was where this whole men as allies thing dawned on me was at one of the retreats. And early on, the retreat really inspired me in my business 4 years ago to really get this conversation going, like less about the problems, and the solutions, which, the onus isn't on women to fix the women's problem, which kind of got me to being in all these rooms with all women talking to each other. Like you said, we're just talking to each other. How is this solving the problem?
Exactly. I need an ally to advocate for me. So if I need to get to a table that is predominantly male, I need one of the guys at the table to vouch for me and say, yes, she's good. Let's let her in. I can't just talk to all my girls and say like, oh my gosh, they won't let us in. Well, then we're just talking. I need I need a man. I need you to sit down and talk to you, hear your perspective. I need you to hear my voice. And then I need you to help me carry my message to that audience. Help me shape my message so that the audience will hear me. Because men and women, our thought processes are different. So I really need that teaching, that learning, that advocacy to help me as I'm trying to move my message forward. Because it's diversity. It's diversity. Think about it. When we want to tap into different markets, if you want to tap into the African American market or the Hispanic market, you turn to individuals from that market to talk to them to find out, how do I do this? If I'm trying to tap into a segment that is predominantly male, who do I need to turn to? A man. I need your help.
Yeah, it's just like any focus group where you're trying to get input from your consumer. You talk to the consumer. You look up inside many organizations, it's generally 80% at the top are men. Exactly. And so that's who we need to be talking to. And I think this is frustrating for a lot of women that, they want the safe place to connect with just women, to share the real challenges, to be vulnerable, to feel safe. However, bringing men into the conversation, I've heard the feedback of like, great, now my safe place, men are just going to dominate it again. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely this caveat of it's still about women's empowerment at these conferences, these retreats.
Mm-hmm.
However, bringing men into the fold as the advocates they could be inside the walls of organizations when we leave, they need to be
Mm-hmm.
privy to that, right? We need their voice to be heard. We need them to help amplify our voices. And so I know having your voice be heard and having the last name Herd minus the A, but love the play on words there. It's such a great
Thank
communication
you.
strategy. How do
Thank
you
you.
recommend? I know you've got a book cooking up.
I
How do you?
do.
For women? I hear this often. Like they just need to speak up, right? They just need to say what they want. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not always
Mm-hmm.
perceived greatly, and I think that's why we don't do it. We tiptoe around things a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more. What would you offer for women that want their voice to be heard more?
I'll be honest with you. It's a journey because first of all, you have to find your voice. You have to find your voice. And not only do you have to find your voice, you have to own it. And I think that when we stop apologizing for our voices and stop apologizing for, our truth, then we can be heard, because we spend so much time silencing ourselves. We silence ourselves. People hear us, but we're only giving them so much of the message. We have to stop silencing ourselves and use our words and stand in our truth and communicate in order to be heard. That's been the biggest lesson I've learned through writing the book. That when I look back on my career, both working in corporate America and then working for myself, the biggest challenges I have had have come from me when I did not hear myself. I let the voices of others drown out my own voice.
Yep.
So it's almost like you have to go through a paradigm shift and realize, okay, this is my voice, this is my truth, and you're going to hear me because you have all the resources to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
People will hear you. You have an audience. You have a platform. So now, how are you going to use it? And that to me has been the journey, and that's what I hope the reader will experience as they read the book. How to really find the confidence to use what they have because they have it already. We all have it.
Yeah.
We have it.
Everyone has an audience. It's how you choose to speak with them. I love the concept of ownership. I do think as much as the woman's problem isn't the woman's problem alone to fix, we do need to own our stories, share our stories.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be this aggressive, masculine, I'm dominating kind of thing. It can still be very feminine, but own it and embrace it.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
the journey, it doesn't have to be perfect. I love that too. It's an evolution.
Absolutely. It is. And I realized once I started talking about very transparently the missteps that I've made and the lessons that I've learned, then people started to hear my voice because there was an authenticity that existed and it created a level of comfort and accessibility. And it really opened the door for people to hear my voice. So I think that when we start as the kids, they start getting real about things and start really sharing honestly and openly, then people hear us. Because we all have stories. Every person has a story, and being open and honest about your story, it inspires so many people and motivates and encourages so many people. And that to me has been another lesson that I've learned as I've been working on the book.
That's so great, Denise. Yeah, the vulnerability. People respond to authenticity, and that means sharing some of your chinks in your armor, the weaknesses, the things that hold you back, the missteps you've made. So the more real you are, the more people respond to it. And I think as women, we're actually pretty good about doing that. It's not, woe is me. I'm not doing anything right. There's a balance there. I'm sharing, no, I don't get it right sometimes, and here's where I've struggled, and here's what I learned. And so
Absolutely.
that's a great message. Well, Denise, I'd love for our listeners to find ways to follow you. You've got the book that's coming out sometime soon.
Absolutely.
What are some ways to stay in touch with you?
So you can, on Facebook at Denise Herd, and also you can follow me on Twitter at Denise Herd, and I'm on Instagram too at DJ Always Heard. So it's a running joke. My middle name is Jennifer, so DJ, and then I'm Always Heard, DJ Always Heard, and And of course, you can always email me at denise@herdstrategies.com.
Awesome. Awesome, Denise. Well, we'll be excited to help share the book and celebrate with you. It's been such a journey that I've enjoyed watching, an evolution of sharing your story and sharing your voice and being heard. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
In the studio today, we have with us Eleanor Beaton. She is an award-winning journalist and podcast host, keynote speaker, and women's leadership development mentor. She has served as chair of the Visiting Women's Executive Exchange Program at the Yale School of Management. In 2017, she won the prestigious Profiles in Diversity Women Worth Watching Award for her work promoting diversity and inclusion. She joins previous recipients of this award, including General Motors CEO Mary Barra, Xerox CEO Ursula Burns, advocate actress Gina Davis, and many other women from diverse industries and backgrounds driving meaningful change in parity and gender equality. She was named Canada's Leadership Coach of the Year in 2017 Corporate Excellence Awards. So, through her keynotes and training programs, Eleanor helps ambitious professional women develop confidence, presence, political savvy, and influence they need to smash the glass ceiling and take their seats at the tables where the big deals and decisions are made. And she's an international keynote speaker. Eleanor, welcome. Thanks so much for making time for this.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
Well, as we do with all of our amazing guests this season, we're asking for a candid conversation. We understand, I think you've probably been privy to quite a few around gender and the dynamics between men and women in the workplace through your podcast and speaking engagements. I'm curious, Eleanor, what is a candid conversation you would like to share with our listeners?
The one that I kept thinking about, that kept returning to me, it was actually a couple of conversations that I had almost exactly 12 years ago. So my son, my oldest son, is 12. And at about this time, 12 years ago, a few months earlier perhaps, I was pregnant with him. I was the main breadwinner in my family, like 40 odd % of women are in many North American and American households today. And I was an entrepreneur. So I had a communications consulting business actually, and worked on things like crisis communications and developing communication strategies for leaders, that type of thing. So I was, my plans at the time, which were really a necessity in our family dynamic at that stage of my life, were that I would continue taking on key projects throughout, basically immediately. And so my husband is a real partner in every sense of the word, and we're going to be raising our kids together. He would be very hands-on. So I remember walking into, this was actually a woman-owned company, and I was sort of finalizing negotiations on a project, and I met with the male director of operations. And so, we talked about the work and so on. And he was really grilling me on whether I was going to have enough time to do the project. And, the irony is that this was not the only conversation that I had about this. I think I had at least, 3 that I remember quite vividly of people asking me, Eleanor, how are you going to manage this? Are you really going to have the time to take on this type of work? Are you really going to be able to do a good job? And it was excruciating, Julie. It was really, really difficult because it was important to me to take on those contracts. They were career shaping contracts. On the one hand, I wanted to, the sort of salesperson in me wanted to make sure I was addressing all of their concerns. But the feminist in me knew that if it were my husband having that conversation, if it were my husband, sitting down across from them, the conversation would be entirely different. And that question would, in fact, never have come up. And so I can remember it being really, really difficult. And it was 12 years ago. I've evolved since then. But at the time, I kind of answered their questions. And I sort of wrapped it up with, And if I didn't have time to do it, I wouldn't be here. But what I wish I had done is actually used it. And what I would do now is use it as a learning opportunity or a coaching opportunity, and actually responded not with a response, but with a question.
Mm. That's so true. I mean, and what's so interesting about that is you got pretty direct feedback. Are you going to have the time to do that? A lot of times it's unconscious bias that we're thinking in that situation. We're thinking it, we're not saying it. So you had the opportunity to directly respond. And you're right, it could be an excellent coaching module.
Totally.
For future.
Totally. It was such a waste. But and exactly, you're so right. I mean, so often what happens is that we might not even give women an opportunity to do something. We might not offer them the challenging assignment because, oh, she's got a young infant at home. She wouldn't want to be traveling. She wouldn't want to be working late on this. But to me, it's all about that power of choice. But you're right. So when I look back at that time, it's something that I really wish I had handled differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of a similar story I had. It was several years ago, 9 years ago now, but I had a summer internship during my MBA program at a top, Fortune 500 company. And the CEO said to us, and this is way before kids were on my radar, but he said to me and the other female intern that alone, it's difficult to promote women in the childbearing years. And it was a verbatim statement that was said. And I didn't handle it. I really just was like, well, whatever. And I'm going to do my work. So I didn't even address it. And I look back on that moment like, wow, what a teaching moment for him. And there were several follow-up conversations because that was a very blatant statement that he made. But I remember having the opportunity one-on-one to say, when you said this, I don't promote women in the childbearing years. What did you mean exactly by that? It was a moment of clarity when you play back people's exact words to say, tell me more about that. Where's that coming from? And especially with yours, it's such a teachable moment because would you ask that of a man? Help me understand how you got there, that I wouldn't have enough time. Flip it, and it's not something we don't ask men. How does he do it all? I mean, it's absurd to even think of saying something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's that, questions are such a powerful tool, and they're such a powerful tool, especially during uncomfortable conversations or when someone has taken you by surprise. So often it's about having the presence of mind in that moment to be able to stay there in the conversation, in the moment, and ask a powerful question and really, be in a place of curiosity. And, it takes a lot of discipline to do that in the moment because you really have to separate yourself from those sort of lizard fears.
Right. Emotional intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It does. It requires you to pause, take a deep breath. And I found in the moment, I couldn't choose the right words. I was shell shocked. I just kind of went into, okay, I want this to be over. I want to get away, find a safe place. But a couple days later, stepping into it and asking a question sometimes is more appropriate. I mean, you kind of have to manage your emotions and check them if you're going to be okay to step into it. If you can pause, manage it, and express, a curious question. I love that, Eleanor. Very tangible for our listeners. So you've been on a journey with your business, and I love everything that you're doing from a podcast perspective, a keynote perspective. All the topics are very on point with what I see from women leaders here in the States. What are you seeing out there? What's happening with women's leadership? What are you seeing as like trends, topics, things that are very that are resonating with your listeners and audiences?
I think it's, anybody who's in the field of women's leadership, I think that one of the most significant buzzwords or most sort of popular buzzwords that you're going to hear about regardless is confidence. Confidence and the need to develop more confidence, the question, are we underconfident? Are men overconfident? This is a trend, that's been going on for some time now. And I find, to me, confidence is, really fertile ground for exploration, both personally and from sort of more of a macro level with respect to women's leadership. That's absolutely something that, comes up a lot, that people are very interested in learning more about. But, to me, what's actually, more interesting in many ways than, the sort of umbrella of leadership or the idea of confidence is actually about power. Because, to me, power is something that when I really look at what it means to have women participating at the very upper levels of leadership inside organizations, inside sort of corporate structures primarily, which is where my main focus is. One of the things that I think is really important, that we don't explore enough is to really take a look at women and power, how our own relationship with power, both our personal power, power structures, how we view, as an organization, as a culture, powerful women. That's where I see, from my vantage point, that to me is an area of rich exploration. As we start to advance this conversation, as we start to take a look at, the work that you're doing in terms of really engaging allies, the work that we do, to build our confidence and leadership presence and all that good stuff. To me, what I'm really interested in is power, how we build it, how we own it, how we leverage it, and ultimately how we use it. Beyonce is on the cover of Vogue, the September issue of Vogue. And for anybody who hasn't had a chance, I encourage you to check it out, not just for what she says, but for what she does. Because she ultimately used her power to take creative control over that experience. An institution I would argue that Vogue is an institution, so is Anna Wintour, it's longtime editor-in-chief. She uses her power to discuss, body image, to discuss pregnancy and childbirth, especially among African American women, and also to promote and give attention to the first Black photographer, African American photographer, to shoot a cover for Vogue magazine. To me, that is really understanding and leveraging power to create greater equality, multiple perspectives. I can't get enough of that. That's where things are going, right? And that's what I'm really interested in.
I know. It's just, I love what Oprah says about it takes a series of events. It's never just one event, the Beyonce cover. It's the continual effort that leads to change. And so I agree. I mean, being an African-American woman, her pregnancy was such an interesting story. Having a powerful male ally beside her. I mean, she's a riveting example of where the future is going. So thanks for sharing that with our listeners. That September issue of Vogue will be great to check out. And Eleanor, to your point about power, absolutely. I mean, I think confidence is a symptom of that problem, right? The power imbalance. Certainly, a lot of research has been done on the Me Too movement. And when power is imbalanced and it's placed in the hands of few, it can be abused. Right? And when you don't have power, you sacrifice things that you might normally not sacrifice because you don't think you're worthy, or you have that mental story of more of a position of a victim. And so it's really interesting to see where this is evolving. I personally see that, and this fits nicely with the power dynamic that you're talking about, is belonging. A sense of belonging inside organizations is a very, fairly basic human need. And I think for a lot of women that feel isolated or don't see themselves represented in organizations, or they don't have critical mass yet at a leadership team level of having strong female presence, that, you look up, you look around, it's like, I don't belong here. What am I doing here? And so, yeah, absolutely. Confidence is huge buzz word around women's leadership. Oh, we just need to be more confident. Like, I wish there was a confidence switch you could just hit.
That's right.
There are some great tools out there. I personally, I'd love if you have books out there. I know I love the Confidence Code, and You're a Badass is a great one too. Are there books that you recommend to your listeners?
There would be those. But I'm going to share something else. I recently have gotten a little bit obsessed with an Australian reality TV show featuring a face-off among 12 at-home bakers called Zumbo's Just Desserts. So I encourage, and I'm on point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm on point. And what's fascinating about this show, so you have, men and women bakers, and each day they're competing against each other in this, seemingly, it's basically a heroic bake off. There's a couple of things I love about it. One is how women compete with one another and the energy that they bring to competition, which I find fascinating and very inspirational, deeply inspirational to see. But the other thing that I observed, because there were 4 gentlemen, there were 8 women competing, and the difference in confidence levels that had very little to do with ability. It was interesting as an observer, sort of as a social scientist, to check it out. And I think it's actually quite instructive for us. It's outside of a corporate setting. You see, they're in a competitive environment, which can be, like many workplaces, you can have different levels of competition happening. How we respond, how we engage in competition, and what it takes for women to come out and say, I can do this. I want this, and I have found that to be instructive. If you watch the show, as a social scientist, as a student of confidence, it's riveting. Plus the confidence code, of course.
Yeah, the science behind it is, and I think it's important to recognize. I mean, there is some science that supports we do have some gaps, but as the authors and as this TV show shows, you can put yourself in situations where you can absolutely change the course of that. And so there is personal power, back to your word power, involved in reclaiming that. And a lot of tools that I use to reframe my brain. I mean, that negative self-talk thing is just such a drag. It affects,
Totally.
I've yet to meet a woman that doesn't have that happen.
I know.
And men are like, yeah, whatever. I just move on. So excellent, Eleanor. I love all these tangible tips. Sounds like a fantastic, very interesting TV show to watch.
You better check it out.
The having, being Canadian and traveling internationally, I'm curious, what are you seeing for differences? Most of my listeners are here in the States, although we're growing internationally. I'm curious, what's your vantage point for the dynamics with gender around the world? What are you seeing there?
It's fascinating. And I was thinking a lot about this question. So, of course, in our Canadian political system, in our cabinet, we have a gender balanced cabinet. So when you think about the most powerful politicians in the country who are running, portfolios such as justice, the environment, healthcare, we have a gender balanced cabinet, which I think was a really wonderful symbolic gesture, from our prime minister. When you look at the corporate world, particularly in Canada, not so much unlike the United States and other really developed countries, we have really stalled somewhat in the last 20 years, and we seem to be having difficulty promoting women into upper leadership positions. We are having a big problem getting enough women into leadership roles, especially inside STEM. And what's interesting is that there are fewer women working in STEM as a proportion than there were, 35 years ago.
Yes, Brotopia does a great job of showing that.
Right. It's just, so there's certain, and when you look at where the economy is going and the role of science, technology, engineering, and math in, the advancement of our economy and our planet, it's really important that we have those perspectives at the table. From an international perspective, my lens, because a lot of the work that I do really involves bringing women together. What I find fascinating is the similarities. When you bring a group of women together, there is in some ways a universality of certain experiences that we have much more in common, with our sisters from other parts of the world than we do not, than we have different. But of course, in certain parts of the world, what I have seen is that there is an additional sort of baked in layering on of both conscious and unconscious and conscious gender bias. So in Canada, many of the women that I'm working with are primarily experiencing unconscious gender bias. I would say that is the primary thing that they're dealing with.
Sure.
In other parts of the world, it's much more at a very conscious level.
Yep. I think that's a good way to describe it. And that helps with the awareness, right? Because you can't be aware of something that's unconscious. So if it has evolved to an unconscious level where you're thinking something but not saying something or even acting on it, it does help. The way what we believe does show up in how we make decisions. Not always, but the more conscious you become of it, the more you can call that out and change your behavior. But if you're not aware of it, it's really hard. And then you're right. In some less progressive, less developed parts of the world, it is very conscious, and statements and behaviors are take place more regularly than they would otherwise that are blatantly wrong. And so I love this whole idea of raising consciousness about it. And I look to our neighbors up north, and I've found in my international travels, the Canadian country or Canadians, Australians, and the Scandinavian countries have really got a better handle on this. You mentioned, the cabinet as a representation. That's a great data point. We're light years behind in Congress, and certainly in our political ranks, and in most CEOs, and C-suites are still very, very male dominated here, but that's changing in other parts of the world. So I think it can be done, but there's been a deliberate, intentional focus on this as well. And you have male allies like your prime minister that are lifting women up alongside them.
Absolutely.
So excellent. I know we're out of time, Eleanor. This has been so good. I could talk to you for hours. I'm just so intrigued by the work you do, and it's so synergistic with our beliefs here. How do our listeners follow you? How do they stay in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. The best place is at my website, eleanorbeaton.com. That will lead you to the podcast and to all kinds of other neat things. Thank you so much for having me, Julie. It's been great.
Absolutely. And we'll link to that in the show notes, Eleanor. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Point podcast and our candid conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend or subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us at Next Pivot Point on social media, and check out our website for free, amazing resources to support your candid conversation journey. It's www.nextpivotpoint.com. Thank you.